Welcome to the Friday edition of Bible Time, and we have a couple of great Psalms to help us end our week. We've got Psalm 31 and 32. Both of them deal with troubles. Psalm 31 talks about troubles from without, and Psalm 32, troubles from within. I hope that you're reading these Psalms carefully, and we would recommend that you do that before you listen to Bible Time. But in Psalm 31, a lengthy psalm, you see that David is dealing with troubles. David had real adversaries. David wasn't just a guy, sitting down by the river writing his hit songs here. These psalms came out of real life experiences, and you could tell he faced many difficulties. In fact, if you just take note of the words that are used here in this psalm, Psalm 31, he talks about affliction, distress, grief, sorrow, sighing. He talks about persecutors, enemies, adversaries, the wicked. He talks about the whispering of many, saying things about him, the schemes of many, the plots of many, the lying lips against him. David lived a real life in a real world, and these psalms reflect his experience in that real world. But notice what he says about the Lord in the midst of all this. The Lord is a refuge. The Lord is a rock. The Lord is a strong fortress. He talks about the steadfast love of the Lord. And he proclaims, "You are my God." That's where he's looking for help with these troubles, without these people that are against him, these adversaries, enemies, the wicked who are plotting against him, plotting to take his life, by the way. So David knew real challenges, real difficulties, but he found the Lord to be his refuge. And I love the statement in verse 19. I think this is the key to his whole attitude. It'll be a key for you and me too. He says, "Oh, how abundant is your goodness, which you have stored up for those who fear you." The Lord has a storehouse of goodness ready to be poured out on you. And if you are one who fears the Lord, the fear of the Lord is the key to that storehouse of goodness that he'll pour out on you in the midst of whatever you might be facing. And so again, his attention isn't on the whispering of his enemies. His attention is on the word of God. That's what it means to fear him. You've got my attention. I'm listening to what you have to say, God. And what he finds in that is a storehouse of goodness. A storehouse of goodness to help us with the troubles without in our daily experiences. But then in Psalm 32, he talks about troubles within. And the troubles within come from our own sin, and that's what you see him talking about here, his own sin. And the sin that's being mentioned here is the sin with Bathsheba, and the sin of having Uriah put to death. And you can see that sin caused great trouble for David. If you look at verses 3 and 4, this is what happened to him as a result of that sin. He says, "For when I kept silent about his sin," before he confessed his sin, when he tried to hide it, cover it up, deal with it on his own. He says, "For when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long." That was the effect of sin in his life. It brought a guilt, and it caused him to groan all day long. I mean, you got to imagine. I mean, he had a man killed, and he's committed adultery, and that is weighing on him heavy. Verse 4, "For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was dried up as by the heat of summer." It's like he's completely washed out by the guilt of this sin. And when he says that God's hand is heavy upon him, God was bringing the guilt on him, but he's doing it to help David to see it and to turn from it. And that's what David did. And then verse 5 says, "I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and here's the good news, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin." So troubles within, troubles that we bring upon ourselves by our own sin, The way to respond to that is by confessing our sin, turning from our sin. And what we'll find is that the Lord will forgive and our sin will be completely covered. As it says in verse 1, blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. It's covered. God covers it in the forgiveness. It's completely covered. It's been completely removed, and all of it. He mentions specifically his transgressions, which be his rebellion against God, his sin, which was missing the mark of God's standard, and his iniquity would be the perversion of all that was involved in what he did. But he finds blessing in the forgiveness of his sins, in the confessing of his sins, and it causes him to be glad and rejoice, as he says it near the end of the psalm. So the point there is that when you feel God's hand heavy upon you because of the guilt of your sin, don't resist him. Confess your sin. Don't resist him. Don't be like the horse or the mule that he talks about in verse 9. Don't resist him. Confess your sin, and he will forgive you, and you'll be cleansed. It'll all be covered. And so great Psalms to end our week with, to talk about how to deal with the troubles without and the troubles within, as we learn from David as he writes these inspired Psalms for us to learn. Certainly much for us to meditate upon and to consider in our own walk with the Lord. And what a great way, as I said, to end our week together. I trust that you'll be in church on Sunday worshiping the Lord with fellow believers, and we'll see you next week for more Bible time.